What's going on, Shield Brothers and Shield Maidens? This is True for Shield's Rest, and today I am finally talking about Daggerheart combat. So let's get into it. Alright, so Daggerheart combat. I'm not going to worry about doing a comparison with D&D combat because either you know it or you don't. And if you're interested in Daggerheart, it's because you kind of already heard that Daggerheart combat's vastly different than D&D. So, with that in mind, the first thing you most likely have heard of when it comes to Daggerheart is the fact that there's no initiative. No more waiting around, no more waiting to see who's going to do what and when. Players unprepared for their turn, or you as a player have been so prepared for your turn, you're just waiting and waiting and waiting, and you can't do anything. And you gotta wait for the moment that you can finally go when the pause button's been pulled off of you so you can do something, right? That's gone away. Daggerheart has taken a very different approach, and I think this is what I love so much about the system, is the combat side of it. Because it's streamlined it down, whereas D&D was pretty convoluted. Daggerheart's kind of remedied that. So in that first way, it is through the no initiative. So how do you deal with that? How do you know when you go? How do you know what you can't even do? So we're going to get into all of that. Now, to start off with, you as a GM, this is going to be the biggest barrier to entry when it comes to this system, is learning how to deal with no initiative. No, because you're going to have players that are super energetic and then super quiet. They're just not going to be able to speak up, whereas the energetic ones are going to be so into it that they take the spotlight too much. Okay, so the idea is that there's this spotlight that goes around from player to player to player, so that way people focus in on it. And I have found that my players are more engaged into the combat because it's predicated on whether they do something or not. Like, if they know what they're doing, they can say that this is what they want to do. You know, that's the best part about this. So the energetic ones, you can already kind of see that the energetic ones are going to be set up to be the ones that are doing everything. Whereas the quiet people are going to be sitting in the wings and not sure when to go. They almost need permission to play, okay? That's where you as the GM give that permission. You got to control the chaos just a little bit. So I did that with my Daggerheart playtest and have done so now within the campaign. And this is one area that I realized that I needed to get skilled at first. You have to give the spotlight around at first. So that way people understand when they should take it, when they can take it, and when to let somebody else chime in, okay? You got to let your energetic people realize that every moment is not their moment, that this is a team and group play. This is not a them playing this and just them spotlight, okay? Whereas the quiet people, you got to pull them out of that shell for a brief moment. You got to almost be the first, like, your adversary has to hit them first, you know, right from the get-go, and then you need to pass that to them and be like, so what do you do in response? That kind of thing. That's how you give that spotlight. And then your energetic player is going to want to chime in on top of that. After they get done with their thing, they're going to start coming in. So that's what you want to see. That's that collaborative play, that collaborative storytelling combat side that you need to get baked into your group. Again, takes time, takes a little bit of experience, but if you start off with those easy encounters or those standard encounters, that's going to force the hand, and they're going to kind of understand what that looks like and what that means. And especially in a non-threat, or at least a low-threat sort of situation, that's going to be super helpful. So make sure you give that spotlight to that quieter player to bring them out of it just a little bit more, so that way they can work well with the rest of the team, and the energetic person isn't the first one to just talk, you know, because they know what they're going to do. They already have an idea and they're ready, and those are probably the people that can switch up and get really flexible really quick with what's going on. So allow them to exercise a little bit of that ingenuity that they already have, and realizing that the situation changes, they're going to need to change their tactics just a little bit. But it's good because they can incorporate that faster than a quieter person can. Because the quieter person's going to probably work through those things that they can do, things that they might not be able to do, okay? But that's no initiative. That's how you want to start things off, is giving that spotlight out and then moving that around. Now, we'll get into what you as a GM can do and how your adversaries kind of play into things, but let's first start off with the players. How do you as a player take actions. How do you as a player do things? Like, what do I do with my hands? What do you do? So the way that you as a player can take these actions, it's going to be your domain cards. It's going to be when you just say that you want to do things. If you want to climb a wall, that's an action, If you want to say that you attack somebody, that is the action. You want to cast a spell, that's the action. Any domain card pretty much is going to be an action. Unless it tells you otherwise, like a reaction of some kind, for the most part, you're going to just be taking an action for whatever it is that you're doing. But that means that gives your GM a fear token. Okay? Every action that each of the players are making, fear token, fear token, fear token, fear token. Every single time. Okay? So be cognizant of that because that's how your GM is going to make moves against you. So, something to think about. Not that you should be worried about it, but just something to think about, because if the more moves that you make, the more your GM's going to be able to do, okay? So just keep that in mind. So let's get into reaction rolls. So there are reaction rolls, and this isn't something that you can just choose to take. This is something that is levied upon you from an adversary, or that you levy upon an adversary from your domain cards, okay? Reaction rolls are very simplistic and very straightforward. Essentially, it's reacting to whatever's going on, okay? That's really all it is in essence, but you're going to roll your duality dice, but you're not going to generate hope or fear, okay? That's the only thing. So no matter what, your GM is not going to get fear because you rolled with fear. You're also not going to get hope because you rolled with hope. Does not matter. It's just going to be a straight roll, no hope or fear generated. So when you attack, you're going to have different damage types. Your weapon's going to kind of tell you that in the profile. It's going to tell you either physical or magical. And you kind of need to understand what that means. It's not a huge deal in Daggerheart. It's just a way of distinguishing between the kind of damage that is being done. They don't really care so much about it being fire damage or ice damage. They care about that when it comes to the spells, but not when it comes to the weapon. The weapon's just, it's magical. Whether it's divine, whether it's arcane, that is up to you as the player. That is just flavor text. Doesn't have a lot of bearing otherwise. The only way that it matters is to your GM because of the adversaries that they bring to the table. Because they're going to have adversaries that might be vulnerable to magic damage, or might be vulnerable to physical damage for whatever reason, or on the reverse side are going to be resistant or immune. Now, resistant is exactly what it's like in D&D, where it's having the damage that they take. Immune is exactly as it sounds, where they're just immune to the damage. They're not going to be taking that damage. So they might be immune to physical damage. They might be immune to magical damage. Whatever the case is, that's the only reason why it matters. Really and truly, that is it. Outside of that, it doesn't matter. So, damage. How do you even deal damage at this point? So, when you roll to attack and you're obviously successful, you roll your damage. But what does that even mean? So, you're going to have your weapon damage. And that's going to be in the weapon profile, obviously. It's going to tell you what the damage dice is. 1d10 plus 3, whatever. The only way that you increase the amount of damage dice that you roll is through your proficiency. So if you're at a proficiency 3, your character's going to be rolling 3d10. Let's use the d10 weapon damage here. They're going to be rolling the 3d10 or the 3d6, 3d8, whatever the weapon damage is, they'll roll 3 of those dice if they're at proficiency 3. Proficiency 4, you go up to 4 dice, and so on and so forth. So you kind of get the idea. But that's how you deal damage. So you're going to roll all that, tell them the total, and then they're going to, the GM's going to do whatever they got to do. They're also going to do the same thing to you, and then you're going to, of course, decide whether you want to use armor or not, which we'll get into here in a second. So when you take your action, and let's say you did your attack, you defeated that adversary, and you see one off to the side that's probably within what would be considered a movement range, you can do that. You can take your action and then move. When you move, you're going to move up to close range. They deal in range bands within Daggerheart. Kind of like the Genesis system, they deal in range bands. But they just call it different names. So when it comes to range bands are going to be your melee, your very close, your far, and very far range bands, okay? I would advise getting away from understanding how many feet are involved within those range bands, just because you as a player are probably going to defeat your own self before you even speak to find out if you can do the thing that you want to do, if you can see how many feet away they are. So work with your GM on that. Work with them on whether they're going to be within range, whether you can get to that range, whether it's movement based, because you're melee and you're trying to get up into that within range of them and you're trying to get in the melee with them. Whatever it is, don't defeat yourself before you actually talk to your GM. Talk to your GM, like find out, okay, how far away is this particular adversary, and is it possible for me to get up there? And they may tell you that no, it's not, or yes, it is, and the way that it is through you spending your entire action, well, at least a whole action, if not you also trying to attack, and that's going to be another action on top. And again, that ends up being 2 fear tokens right there. But if you're going to try and get up to, like, let's say far range, you're going to have to spend that action, and then you're going to probably have to make an agility roll. So if you wanted to get up there, you can get up there. Just know there's a way. It's just there's a cost to it, okay? So the way that it goes is it's based off the agility roll. So your GM's going to come up with a DC based off of the way the battleground is situated, whatever the field of battle is. It may be because there's a lot of adversaries. It may be because that it's a little bit slick. Maybe there's a lot of fog going on. Whatever it is, you're going to have to navigate your way through the battlefield to get to that far range. The agility roll is going to be necessary, or the finesse roll. It depends on what your GM's going to call for and what you might be able to, like, argue in favor of. Like, maybe you can make the right argument to say, hey, I feel like this is more of a finesse check for my rogue character rather than an agility, you know? Whatever it is, again, always work with your GM. Always, whatever it is you're working on, like, just ask, like, hey, can I do this? And they're probably going to tell you yes. Now, when you're using a physical map, I think we're all used to the battle maps that got the grid, that have the grids on there. Try and get one that doesn't have the grid on there. Get to a whiteboard or whatever. Or if you're using Tabletop Simulator, find the map pictures that don't have grids on them and subsequently take the grids off out of the options. So that way your players aren't focusing in too much on calculating how many squares away they are, how many feet away they are, and they can just focus in on what it is that they're trying to do, you know? One less calculation to worry about. But if you are worried about range bands and, you know, how many feet are there, your melee range is going to be, obviously, your engaged range. They're going to be right there within 5 feet, and you're going to be, you know, attacking them that way. Very close, on the other hand, is going to be within 10 feet. And then close is within 30. From close, you go to far, which is within 100 feet. And then from far to very far is within 300 feet. That's kind of how it plays out. Again, try and get away from it. It feels better when you do, just because it's one less calculation. Like I said, one less calculation that you have to worry about. Just get away from it. So, all right, so in combat at melee range, how do you know if you get hit? How do you know whether they've missed, right? That's going to be your evasion score. And your evasion score is going to be driven initially by your class. There's going to be a few things that you can do within leveling up, domain cards, that will allow you to increase that evasion score. Honestly, if you want to learn how to make an evasion build, check out our rogue and our ranger video that we did for the class builds. Those were our evasion builds that we created because, actually, funny enough, ranger has the most evasion. Rogue does not. Just saying. So if you really wanted that evasion expert, go ranger. And check out what options we took to get to that evasion 17, because that is a hard thing to do. You're not getting to evasion 17 with ease, okay? You have to find the synergy to make that happen. But your evasion score is your to hit. That's really all it is. It doesn't play into anything else besides whether an adversary hits you or not. All right, so let's get into armor. Armor is going to be a bit different than what you're used to. So with this, you have an armor score and then you have armor slots. You start off with 6 armor slots and then you have an armor score that's derived from the value of your armor. So let's say you have a 6 in your armor score. If you take damage and you want to negate that down, so let's say you want to get 18 damage to be less than 8, and you have an armor score of 6, you're going to utilize 2 armor slots to basically add up to 12 damage that you're negating to get it below that 8 value that you want to get it below, okay? The reason for that is it's going to fall into different damage thresholds, which we'll get into here in a second. The whole point of that is so that way you're not taking nearly as many hit points from this damage as you would have otherwise. But this is how armor gets baked in. Now, I know Critical Role has gone through and discussed a little bit, they've teased at the new armor scores and the way that that armor is going to be utilized in the official system. We're in 1.5, so unfortunately this is all we got to work with, and I'm not going to speculate as to what that exactly means for them. So I'm waiting till the book comes out, and then I'll obviously do an update on all this. But that's kind of how armor works, is you're going to use your armor slots to add up the value of your armor score to negate damage. Now you can choose to do it or you can choose not to. It doesn't matter either way. It's just up to you if you want to take 3 hit points or 2 hit points, whatever, wherever that damage lies. That's up to you whether you want to take that damage or if you want to try and negate a good portion of it, so that way it's less damaging, you could say. So that's really all it is in the end. So let's get into damage thresholds and hit points. So you start off with 6 hit points, and the damage thresholds determine how many hit points you take when you take damage. You're going to see how combat can be really quick depending on what kind of damage you're taking. So with the thresholds, let's start off with that. With the thresholds, you're going to have minor, major, and severe damage that you can possibly take. Minor damage is 1 hit point, major damage is 2, severe is 3. So if you take severe damage, you're losing 3 hit points out of the 6 hit point slots that you start off with. Kind of important to know that, right? You can see how combat's going to get really quick, really fast because of the fact that you just lost half your health in one shot, okay? Now, of course, you can do this to the adversaries, and that's also something to consider, but they die quick, you die quick. So that's something to consider. Which is why armor is so important, because now you're able to drive that down below severe into major or major into minor. So you have a major threshold, which stands between your minor and your major score, right? So let's say you have a major of 8 and then you have a severe of 18. If you take 6 damage, you're only going to take minor damage, that 1 hit point, right? Because it's below your major damage threshold. So anything below that's only going to be 1. Let's say it falls in between your major and severe damage threshold, which is 8 and 18. So if you take 12 hit points, you're going to be taking 2, or if you take 12 damage rather, you're going to be taking 2 hit points off of your character sheet. Okay? Because it falls in between severe 18 and major 8. Now, if you're taking 18 or above, because remember, this is going to be meet or beat for a lot of this stuff. If you're taking 18 damage or more, that's going to be severe damage, which is 3 hit points. Which is why you want to use that armor score to drive it down below, so that way you're not taking nearly as many. So, something to consider. So stress. Stress is going to be the other resource that you have at your disposal. This is also going to start out at 6 slots, much like your armor, much like your hit points, and much like your hope. You're going to have 6 stress slots to work with. Now, you can utilize this for your domain cards. This could be a form of damage that you end up taking. They can do stress damage to you. Or if it's like super hot out and like it's a more of a weather condition, you might have stress that is sapped from you, so that you start losing your stress slots little bit by little bit. And when you lose your stress slots, you start getting into what's considered to be a vulnerable condition, okay? So conditions, you only have 3 conditions, right? So you first have vulnerable, then you have restrained, and then you have hidden. That is it. 3 conditions. It's not like D&D where you got like 20 conditions and you have to go through the darn book just to figure out which condition means what again. Because unless you have it memorized, it's kind of important to know. It's based off the mechanics. You kind of need to know what the heck that means. There's only 3. There's only 3 in Daggerheart. I'll take that any day of the week, okay? So vulnerable is probably the most common one that's going to get used because let's say you run out of stress slots like we were talking about, you get put into a vulnerable state. And that means that you are going to be at disadvantage for everything that you're trying to do. However, individuals that are trying to do things to you are going to be advantage for that. So which means they're going to have a plus D6 to whatever they roll. They're going to roll their dice, add a D6 to whatever that number ends up being that they roll, and that's going to be them at advantage. However, the opposite is very true for disadvantage, where you are going to subtract a D6 from your total. So when you roll your duality dice and a D6, you subtract the value of that D6 from there. Now, restrained. Restrained is exactly kind of how it sounds, is you're restrained. You're not able to move around, okay? You're able to take actions, but you're not able to move around. Now, this is going to be GM discretion in a large way because you're either restrained and like somebody's got you, kind of in a bear hug situation and you can't move from that, but you can still try and get out of it, and that's kind of the action that you have to take. You can do other actions, but again, GM discretion, you're going to have to kind of sell that a little bit because you're probably not going to be able to do a spell necessarily because you're probably don't have access to your arms like that. So you're going to have to try and figure out how you're going to get out of that to remove the restrained condition, okay? So hidden. Hidden is exactly as it sounds, where your character is hidden. This is going to be something that you all want to utilize as much as possible because you're going to have advantage against whoever the adversaries are, whereas they're going to have disadvantage to see you and to hit you, you know, because they don't know you're there, so they're not going to be able to do anything about that if you're truly hidden. But those are the three conditions. So you've got, like I said, vulnerable, restrained, and hidden. It's that easy. All right, so here's the big one. This is player death, okay? Player death is a huge deal within Daggerheart, and I love this. I love the way that they approach the player death. It's not just you falling unconscious and then you got 3 rounds typically, you know, to try and come back. That's not what this is. So remember what Daggerheart's trying to do. They're trying to be narrative, they're trying to be epic, and they're trying to be collaborative with the combat system. And it does exactly that, and more so to the point with player death, okay? So the first one on our list is going to be Blaze of Glory. This is going to be where you do one epic move before your character goes out. It's just done, okay? And it's going to be at an automatic critical success because it should feel satisfying that your character has done something really cool with this death. Now, mind you, this is all player choice. This is, your GM cannot decide this. This is for you as a player to decide how you go about this, okay? So, to me, Blaze of Glory is one of those things where you really want your character to be remembered, but you're also like, you know what, I've accepted that this character's done, and I'm willing to make a new one, you know? So, this is where you want to have fun with it. And you can pretty much pull out every stop, and there's not a whole lot to say no to, typically. At least I don't have issues if my players are trying to do something a little more than what they should be able to. It's a Blaze of Glory. It should be fun. You know, it should be satisfying to some degree. But now that player is done. Their character is dead. They can't do anything more, right? So that's Blaze of Glory, though. Okay, the next one isn't as much fun as Blaze of Glory, but it's called Avoid Death. And the entire point of this is to essentially avoid death. And that's if you can do so. So you have to roll your hope dice, just your hope dice, not your fear dice too, just your hope dice. And if you meet your level or fall below your level, you basically go unconscious. You gain a scar, which means you're going to cross off one of your hope slots, which means you'll be at 5. If you come from 6 hope slots available, you're going to only have 5 available, okay? So you're kind of losing out on that. But your character still lives. They fall unconscious and, you know, they're out for the entire encounter until they are healed or until a long rest can be accomplished. But it's kind of a way to, like, just go down and just call it a day and just wait and hope things work out, you know? Like, you're just kind of hoping that your character survives this, hoping that the rest of your characters survive this whole thing. So you may want to consider not doing that unless you really, really want to hold on to this character. This is one of the more boring player death moves because you're just avoiding death entirely and not accepting it in any way like Blaze of Glory. However, this next one is a little more interesting. So this next player death move is probably one of my favorites. Outside of Blaze of Glory, I think this one's probably the best one. Because I'm a bit of a gambler, you know, in that aspect. I like to see what fate has in store. Okay, and so this next one's called Risk It All. Risk It All is fantastic. So what you do is you roll your duality dice, you roll your hope dice, and you roll your fear dice. You roll them together, and if your hope dice is higher than your fear dice, what you do is you then stay on your feet, you clear your stress and your hit points by comparison to the value of that hope dice, and you kind of have to divide it up. So if you have, let's say you rolled a 6 on your hope and your fear dice was a 5, what you then do is you can now clear like 3 hit points and 3 stress slots, or you can clear 6 hit points, or you can clear 4 hit points and 2 stress slots. So you have to divide up the value of that hope dice to clear out the stress and the hope, but you stay on your feet. You are still alive. Now, if your fear dice is higher, let's say your fear dice is a 6 and your hope dice is a 5, you now just die. You're done. You risked it all. It didn't work out. Time to drop a new character. That's kind of the downside, obviously, but there's also one more side of this that to me is something I would hope for more than anything, is to get the same value on both the hope dice and the fear dice. So let's say it's a 6 and a 6, a 1 and a 1, it does not matter because that is a critical success, which means you clear all your hit points and you clear all your stress, and now you're back up, refreshed. So much more fun. That's kind of how I would go if I was going to be a player. I don't want to do the avoid death and take a scar because the scar is like you're maimed in some way. On top of the fact that you don't have hope, forget that. You kidding me? We gotta have some fun with it, okay? But personal opinion, what can I say? So let's get into GM moves. GM moves, this is gonna be your bread and butter for how you utilize your adversaries, okay? So if you've watched the encounter build where I talk about encounter building as well as adversary breakdown, you're going to already be semi-prepared for this. So adversaries all have like different little features going on, things that they can do, right? Much like your players, they're going to have features, but they're going to play in a specific way. So if you understand the tactics, you're already going to know what they're going to do, right? So to activate your adversaries, you spend 2 fear tokens. This activates your adversaries in general. And then in order to use their features, you're going to have to spend 1 fear token for each of the different features that you want to activate here. Which is why it's important to build out the encounters right, that if you have a leader and a bunch of minions, that leader is going to be able to utilize a feature that employs all the minions into one direction, probably. So something to think about, something to consider. Make sure you are prepared for that kind of stuff and you understand what features your adversaries do have. Overly important. Now, also, what you can do is you can interrupt a player that might be about to do something, and you can throw the fear down to interrupt them and take those moves, whatever it is you're trying to do, right? That's what I like about those. Another way that you get to go is when a player fails. If they roll with fear or if they fail their roll, that's when you get to kind of interrupt and do all the adversary things. Now, again, it's narrative. It's supposed to be epic. Think about if this is the time. So if they fail, sure, take that. But if they roll with fear, you don't necessarily have to. I leave it up to my discretion in the moment. Again, everything's contextual. You got to make sure that if it fits within the narrative, go for it. Otherwise, you can just take that fear, you can hold it off to the side. You can put them in a situation where, because they did roll with fear, you can put them in a situation where they're at disadvantage for something, or somebody else is at advantage for whatever they did, like whether they tripped and fell, maybe they're in a vulnerable state all of a sudden. Whatever it is, depends on how bad it all is. But again, it's up to you to figure out what you want to do with that. So play around with some of those things that you can do and like how you might be able to utilize some of that fear without actually spending it for your adversaries to just immediately go. You know, have some fun with it in that aspect. But those are your GM moves typically. Is going to be going when somebody rolls with fear or fails, and then you spend your 2 fear to activate your adversaries, and then you spend fear to activate their features. That's it. Plain and simple. I think what I love so much about this combat system, I know I've said it in the beginning, but just want to reiterate this, is that it is streamlined. This is you not worrying so much about all the rules that are out there. If you've listened to this, this is pretty quick. This is pretty straightforward. By comparison to D&D combat and a lot of other tabletop RPGs that are out there, this combat is super streamlined, which I love because as a GM, I don't want to deal with all the rules that I have to go through and consider constantly when I can have 3 conditions that I think about. I don't have to worry so much about that. All I have to think about now is how am I going to use the fear? What are my adversaries doing? And that's it. I'm not worried about the initiative order. I'm not worrying about when I go or all the features that my adversaries have. If you look, adversaries don't have that many features. It's not like D&D where they've got a long laundry list of spells and actions that they can take. And then on top of that you need to know what their to hit is, how many hit points they have, what their traits are. None of that matters. In Daggerheart, none of that matters. It's all about the few features that they have, which might be 3 or 4 features at the most, unless you're getting into higher level play, in which case there's probably going to be more, but you're going to build up to that. Outside of that, they're going to have one attack style that they're going to be favoring, and you're done. You know, like that's so easy. But you can see, though, by the end of this, combat's fast. Combat is happening super quick. If you check out our campaign, you would have just seen my players take on a cave ogre. And they took them down pretty easily, and they were level 0. You know what I mean? They didn't have classes by comparison to the tier 1 cave ogre. The cave ogre being tier 1 is meant for level 1 players. These guys aren't even there yet. So, super quick too. It did not last very long. Once they got engaged, that was done in no time flat. The players almost died because the cave ogre throwing rocks. So you see what I'm saying? Like, it's super fast. It's going to happen real quick. But once you understand these basic rules, because it doesn't get much more in depth than this, once you understand the basic rules, it's done. It's easy. You're not worrying so much about the rules. So that's what I enjoy about this. But that's it for the video, guys. That's Daggerheart Combat in a nutshell. So let me know what you think. Anything you're still confused on, anything you want to know more about, let me know. If you actually have run combat, or if you go and run combat and because of this video and then you come back to this, let me know in the comments how that went. If there was anything that you had issues with, anything that you wanted to know more about, let me know and I will be in the comments to kind of help you out. But other than that, throw us a like, throw us a subscribe, comment down below. Like I said, let us know what you think. We really do want to know. We love your feedback. We do try to take that as much as we possibly can and improve our videos. So the more you give us, the more we'll give back to you, okay? But thanks for watching, y'all. Until the next one, keep that shield wall strong.